late, he said.
Yeah, I saw that. Half hour or so. That's what he said. It was a constant line. I mean, it wasn't out the door. The drive-through was through the parking lot.
It was like that at 5:30 this morning when I drove by there. I was there, just on my way. What's going on here? This is crazy.
Yep. So can you see Jake up there?
Nope, no, ma'am.
So who do we have as our recorder?
Nicole is here.
Is she up on?
Yep.
I'm here. Yes, I'm here.
Okay, sorry. I would have to put
But Jake's
glasses on
gonna
to see
be
that
late,
far.
right?
Yep, Jake's gonna be late. We'll call to order the regular meeting of the West Valley City Council, March 28th, 4:30 in the multipurpose room, West Valley City Hall. Note that we have 5 persons in attendance. Council member Hoon and Fitzimanu are not in attendance right now. They hopefully will be joining us soon. We have our minutes from the February 22nd meeting. Do we have any discussion or motion on those minutes?
Motion to approve minutes February 22nd.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay, those pass. Review of next week's minutes or meeting. We don't have one. It's been canceled, so we're good there.
You said next week, but
Sorry, this week's regular meeting, we don't have to review because it's been canceled. Thank you, Lars. Just trying to figure out how to say that proper. All right, we now have ordinance 22-10, and we'll turn the time over to Steve Pastrick.
Thank you, Mayor, and good afternoon, Council. So this item we actually discussed a few weeks ago. It's regarding the council redistricting that we do every 10 years. So we're going to pull up just a brief recap of the presentation we did a few weeks ago. So Nicole, if you're able, oh, there we go. She's allowing me to just having to reconnect here to share my screen. All right, so as you may recall, there were 2 options that were presented to council. The one on the screen here is option 1. And you can see here that the boundaries in red would be the new district boundaries or council district boundaries. The blue dashed lines, you can see where the old boundaries or the current boundaries are. And then this is the second option. During our conversation a few weeks ago, there wasn't a clear winner, so to speak. And so we included in your packet 2 options. So both options we have an ordinance for. So whichever the council prefers as the the preferred option, you could just approve that ordinance, and then that would be the option that is the winner. So any questions on this one?
No, I think last time we went over with you about the option number one. So that Scott and I, we very much kind of like District 1 and District 2, so option number one is best for all of us. Yeah.
I agree. I still prefer option one.
Yeah.
District 3 is affected by that also, so Will, if you have I think you're kind of leaning to option 2.
I was just, it looked a little cleaner. Option one's got that narrow cutout to it, but I'm fine with option one if we wanted to make a decision tonight.
We have 2 weeks next week to think on it. 1 week. Okay,
Great,
I was
thank you.
thinking option 2 was better last time, but I think option 1 keeps the districts closer to what they are now more.
Yeah.
So that's desirable too.
Yeah, we don't want to mess it up for anybody, basically. Yep.
okay. Don, did you have anything to weigh in?
Either one looks good to me. I think
Yeah.
option one is the better one, but I can live with either one.
This week, we received some voter identification cards from the county clerk.
County.
And it had all the districts, which new ones were in, except for West Valley City, it said pending. Can we take a note that in 10 years, we do this earlier? So we beat the deadline for getting those cards out?
Yes. Maybe with Nicole being on, maybe we can have some way of flagging that
Set an
in
alarm
the
for-
future.
For 2030?
And then 2030 will come and they'll do it in May instead of March.
Yeah.
They'll send out the cards in
You're
May
probably right.
or January,
Well,
who knows?
they want to do it before caucus meetings and
Oh, okay.
and things like that, so. If we could have done it earlier, it would have been nicer.
Any other comments? Okay, thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
All right, we now have the consent agendas and we'll turn that over to Mr. Pyle and he's on Zoom.
Mayor, it looks like Mr. Pyle may be having some internet struggles here. He just disconnected and he's right back. I'm gonna try to promote him one more time. Just 1 second.
Okay. All right, Mr. Pyle. The floor is yours.
You have to
You're
unmute.
muted. You're muted.
Thank you, ma'am. I got disconnected there for a second. I'm assuming we're on the consent agenda items, or are we on the communications items?
We're on the consent agenda.
Okay, so the first item is connected with 4700 South, has some minimal costs associated. It's a typical right of way. The others are for the purposes of appointing 3 folks to the Professional Standards Review Board, and our staff and I have worked with all 3 of them, and I'm good with all 3 appointments. Think they'll make great additions to the board.
Okay. Does the council have any questions about the nominees? Or appointees?
What's the typical size, or do we have a size for the review board?
So how many people are on the review board generally?
It does vary. Usually there's anywhere between 5 and 7. I think right now we're at 5, trying to get back to around 7. You'll notice there are 3. Usually when we have somebody join, they're on for a while. We usually have very good candidates, but sometimes they find they have time commitment struggles, that sort of thing. So hopefully of the 3, we'll keep all 3. And if not, we'll be a little bit above strength.
Okay. And there's bios on everybody, so I just didn't know if anybody had questions about any one person. Seeing none, we'll move on. Okay, Mr. Pyle, the budget and program mod update.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Eric's going to bring up the files on the screen and kind of run through them as a point. This is a very just introductory sort of concept to what I've got going on or where I'm at progress-wise at this point. So, and I am basically just calling it the first cut of revenue and expense. And just to give you an idea of what that means, every year as we go through the budget process, we roughly start in about December, we start doing revenue projections, we start getting expense projections, we start doing salary and personnel cost studies around the state and the market. And we start looking at the program modifications, which for those that are new, basically just mean changes or changes that include increases to the budget for the next upcoming year. So we're at the point now where I kind of have a decent feel for what's going on just generally. And this is not meant to be in any way firm. Basically what I'm doing is giving you a kind of a concept of where we're starting at and where we'll be going from here as we sort of assess in time to get you a tentative budget, which would be approved in May. And our aim is always to get you kind of a tentative budget in more of a formal manner in the first part of April. So if you look at this revenue and expense variables, as Eric has put up on the slide for me, it's kind of a little opaque. It's very shorthand. It's kind of the notes that I use, but basically it will illustrate the point. So if you look over on the left side of the slide where it says baseline expenditure, 91.8, that means $91.8 million. And that's basically where we're at from an expenditure standpoint in the current year. And as we go forward in considering changes to that, that's where we base from. If you go down, or I'm sorry, let me do it this way instead. If you go down one line to where it says baseline revenue and go over one cell to the 93.3, that shows you where our current revenue projections currently show us as being at. And you'll notice there's around $1.5 million change or increase there. That's due to sales tax revenue increases across the year. You all know what's happened from an inflationary standpoint, also a consumer demand standpoint, both have been very seriously up. So the sales tax projections have exceeded our budget estimates for the current year as we made them last spring. That has good and bad implications, which we'll talk about more as we go along. If you go back over to the left-hand side of the slide there where it says added expenditure and go down from the 91.8, there's a 12.3 figure. That 12.3 represent, at least at this time, what we're seeing as increased expenditures on from a possibility standpoint on the personnel demand side. And just to give you some context, because of course any number without context doesn't really tell you a whole lot. In a normal year, say over the past decade or so, we've seen personnel increases that are normally in around the, let's call it the $3 to $5 million range from year to year. That can be much lower than that. For example, back in the recession 10, 12 years ago, it was zero. Or it can be more than that, for example, in the last year or so, or two even. It's a little more than the $5 million. But this year is especially tough. That 12.3 includes the 3.3 that the council authorized last summer, which we have funded out of fund balance in the quarters as we've gone along, but we knew we would need to pay for that or build that into the budget in the upcoming budget year. And then it also includes about $6 million of what the personnel department has given to me as market and merit increases across all the sectors of the staff, and then also includes an insurance increase. So that basically includes about a 7% increase in total on the on the police side. That includes about an 8.5% increase on the fire and the public sector sides. The police side is a little bit smaller because, as I mentioned, we had already council approved an increase for them last summer. Very substantial, as you'll remember the time, and kind of a little bit of a chaotic situation comparing with the other cities. So the other part of that 12.3 is a new public safety or police department issue that we're having to consider. That is that after Salt Lake City and then the rest of the valley raised their police salaries last year, which was actually initiated by Taylorsville more than a year ago, if you'll remember. Taylorsville came back at the beginning of January and funded another 15% increase to their staff. Meanwhile, at the same time, Salt Lake City has made it part of their formal policy, as stated publicly, that they would increase their police salaries 1% above anybody in the whole valley, which puts us in a position of consideration, which I'll talk more about a little bit later. That increase would entail about $3 million more for us if we were to do that. So, as I mentioned there a moment ago, the 12.3 becomes a very extreme situation for us. And as you know, there are a lot of different things that are taking place that would drive that. So as I considered that, I basically came up with a few scenarios just for your thought and consideration. I'll be thinking about those as we go forward in the next couple of 3 weeks, and then trying to deal with them from those situations. The situation of trying to raise revenues in order to meet these demands, or deal with the service consequences if we choose not to do that. Eric, will you go to that next slide for me, please? Okay, so there are a lot of subsets that could be possibly derived in these budget scenarios, but basically this is what they boil down to. So the one there on top, full raises to match municipal competition. And it really ends up, again, like I said, these are sort of conceptual numbers. They're not firm or fixed. So 12 on the outset, 11 at the underside, but that would keep us staffed at the current levels with the other cities. It recognizes the inflationary environment that we're in, and the fact that not just in this police situation, which has been the most volatile, but in frankly all of our departments, we are having a very hard time either holding on to or attracting individual positions to our departments. So in this case, we would fund the full raises as they are coming to us for consideration, and we would fund that in a way that would include the following. So the first 3.3-ish million, it's a little bit more than 3 million, but I was using 3.3 because that's important from the conversation last year. We had told you last year that our estimate was it'd be about 3.5 million to fund that police increase at the time. Turns out at this point, now that we have some hard numbers, it's about 3.3 million. So pretty close, but a little bit less, which is nice. So 3.3 million, which the council at the time approved a measure and a commitment that they would raise property taxes to pay for that increase, as we really didn't have any other way to fund that other than possibility of using one-time monies out of fund balance, which we'll talk about here further. Don't recommend it, and obviously you can't do that forever, but it would be at least an option. So 3 million would come from that, and the next million would come from an increase in the sales tax projection. So currently we have 37.6 million budgeted for next year. That's based on sort of the methodology that we use from year to year, but it's actually considerably short of what we're projecting we will receive by the end of this year. We project will be more in the neighborhood of 39 million in sales tax. And again, that's just because of the inflationary environment and kind of the craziness we're seeing out there in sales for everything from bread to a gallon of gasoline to cars themselves. So one way to make up some of that money would be to increase the sales tax projection. I don't, and I know Jim doesn't don't feel hugely comfortable about increasing our sales tax projections just based on the steep curve that we've seen. Eventually that will fall. But in this case, I feel okay to do that because we do have such a large fund balance, both in terms of what we currently have and what we look to be gaining in the upcoming year. So that would make up 1 million of that between 11 and 12. Another million would come from operational cuts, which I've already identified. These are sort of the easy look as I go down first time through the budget and see, oh, we can make up a little bit of revenue here or cut some costs there. So I can find about 1 million there. If we were to fund the police and the public safety, police and fire or public safety raises, we really have two other ways to make up either the 3 million or the 2.5 million together with that, if you want to continue to fund public safety at a level that will keep them competitive. We can either, as I would recommend, increase that property tax raise to about $6 million, which would result in about a 17% property tax increase, which would include about a $10 a month increase on a average household as we measure it, or about $120 a year. Or you could fund a part or all of that with fund balance monies as well. Now, that's kind of the explanation of how we would make up that 11 million if we did it. I just wanted to put that out there as I go through these other three scenarios. So the second scenario would be don't compete with this Taylorsville and Salt Lake scenario, but just fund the market conditions as we are projecting them right now. That, of course, would knock down that additional cost by about $3 million. It'd keep us staffed at our current levels above, or as noted above. However, the other implication of that is you wouldn't have to raise property taxes any higher than the 3 million or the 9% that was committed to last year. However, we would start risking becoming vulnerable to losing police officers and staffing shortages. And again, it's not just in policing. In this case, it would be in fire as well. Probably no sooner than July. The reason I say July is, of course, that's when the new fiscal year starts. However, it's important to note that the Taylorsville increases were already put in place as of January 1. I don't know, and we don't have any information on when or if Salt Lake will do it, but I would assume that they would, especially if we did. But whether we do or whether we don't, I would assume that they would, because that's what they've committed to. So again, this second option would see us fund the pay increases that we've already committed to. It would also have us fund the market conditions as HR department has brought to us, but it would not have us matching the Taylorsville and Salt Lake raises. The third scenario would be to fund the market conditions, but no tax increases at all. And I'm sorry, that's not no tax increases at all. That's just doing the one, no tax increases above and beyond what the council had already committed to. So that would still leave us at the $8 million, but basically then we would have to fund what we had done with either fund balance contributions, as I mentioned, or we would have to do that with a mix of savings from our operational side by hiring freezes, that sort of thing, as vacancies occurred. We could do that, and that is a viable option to pursue. The last, which is sort of the I would say, sort of the emergency scenario. Let's say we think we're going straight into a recession, or let's say we think the economy's going to have a lot harder time in the upcoming year than it looked like even just a couple of weeks or a couple of months ago. Then we could also do a situation where we had no tax increases at all. That would either be the ones that the council committed to last summer, or ones that I'm proposing you consider for the public safety increase. And we would still do the merit increases. And really, basically, the reason we would do that is there are costs that we're basically committed to, not by law, not legally, but from just a plain commitment to the employees as to how we have funded their positions in the past, and things like insurance, that sort of thing. Merit increases would still be in place. So no market increases to match what's going on out there in the other sectors, but a merit increase only that would pay for their step. In that scenario, we would be a $5 million shortfall. And frankly, I don't think we would have any problem funding that even without the tax increases, because frankly, I think we would start losing employees at a pretty accelerating rate. And that would leave just fire and public sectors, just as an example. They'd be a minimum 10% behind where the market is. Police would be somewhere between 4 and 19%, depending on what Taylorsville and Salt Lake did. And so as we lost positions, we would be able to pay for the merit increases and the other new costs by simply doing a hiring freeze and saving money in that way. So that's not meant to be like a cheery scenario, but it is meant to be a realistic one that tells you, yeah, we could do that as well. I'll make a note that across all of these scenarios, I've seen all of these happen across the 20 years that I've been, or almost 20 years I've been the city manager, except for this one on top, this 12 million increase in the environment that we're living in. That's something new to me. And it has been a very difficult position to keep everybody, whether that's animal shelter technicians, whether that's city attorneys, police officers, engineers, heavy equipment operators, lifeguards, has been mentioned in the past, any of them. But we have been able to hang on. And I think that's another note I ought to make, that this $11 to $12 million increase really doesn't put us ahead of anybody. It would put us in a position where we would be competitive with the municipalities around us, but we'd still be behind, for example, the private sector in a lot of the areas that we are losing people to, especially construction. So whether it's heavy equipment operators, whether it's engineers, whether it's people that are associated with that field, it's hard to keep people in that environment. So can't remember if I got another slide on here. Yeah, the fourth slide, if you would go to that, Eric. So next steps, as I'm considering all of those, I'm going to go what I call through my second round and cut. And my focus is going to be trying to make up that $3 million that I'm currently saying, if I can't make it up, I will come back and recommend a higher property tax increase. And that $3 million, how realistic is that for me to find? I would say, given how the past budget cycles have gone, I could probably find $1 million. That's something that I've been able to do in the past just by fine tooth combing, these sorts of things. $3 million is going to be a stretch, but we'll do our best to do that. The second bullet there, of course, is the program modification requests. Those are complete, meaning they've been submitted to me. I'm reviewing them and taking a look at them. I'll make a recommended list to you, of course, during the budget process, and they will include mostly one-time expenditures that won't have a large impact on the overall picture I just laid out for you. Although there will be a few operational increase recommendations, I'm sure, but that won't be a large number. The other piece of that is I will be supplying to you here in the next few days, maybe week or two, the full entire copy of the program modification request, just so you have those for your own review and you can take a look at them. The recommendation that will come back to you will be nothing near to what those recommendations are. Currently, they're at $27 million for this year, but it will be significant, especially given, again, the situation that we look at from a fund balance standpoint. We will be looking at trying to get some capital projects type issues addressed. So with that, I do have backup information on things like, the individual positions and salary information or property tax numbers, that sort of thing, if you have questions on it, but I don't have anything further to present. So with that, Mayor, I'll just turn it over to you for questions.
Okay, So can you email us that? Because it was a lot to absorb.
The,
What you just presented.
the slides there, yeah, I can
What's
email
that?
it to you. Sure.
Oh. I'll bet I didn't re-download when Nicole told me to, so never mind. I'll re-download.
Okay, yeah, I mean, they are there available, but I can email them to you too, if you'd like.
Oh, it'll be all right. I forgot she
Okay.
asked us to do that. Okay. I just thought you guys were all playing a really fun game that I was missing out on. All right, any questions for what Mr. Pyle has for us? Okay. Almost, not really.
No questions, but
It's not happy news, is it?
all signs point to a recession, you know, when you look at the news. I think we're, I don't know. When I look at stuff at work, I just think it's not gonna be pretty.
So comment back to that. All signs do not point to recession, but many do. And you do have an interesting point there. It's making it a very volatile situation for us to project, because a lot of signs do point to recession, but a lot of signs also do point to continued economic activity at high levels of strength. So there's a wide range of consideration here going on.
Send me the good news, Wayne. Send me the good news.
Well, I can give you one. There's 10% projected increase in property values again in this upcoming year. It's, you probably know, just looking at your regular work, 10% plus. Same thing with consumer demand, up.
Okay, any other questions?
Well, I'm just curious. I don't know if we can go back to slide 2. I don't want to prolong this more than we need to, but I really didn't understand a few points in this, especially on the revenue column. Like,
Yeah, sure. Let's go back to that second slide. Eric, thank you. So, sir, yeah, what was your question?
yeah, so on the revenue, we're going from 93 to 96 and then 96 to 97. I didn't understand how those increases were happening.
Yeah, okay.
37.6 versus 39-ish. I didn't know.
You bet. Let's go back over that again. So the 96.6 really just corresponds to the second, third, and fourth columns to the right of those, where you see the individual numbers. So the 3.3 would be realized by the council's property tax increase that they committed to last summer. The $1 million to the 97.6 is the sales tax number that I discussed in terms of versus the 37.6 versus the 39. Again, the 37.6 is what at the first cut, the finance department had projected for sales tax for the upcoming year. So this would have been back in like January, December-ish timeframe. 39 currently, after our sales tax receipts for February, is more looking like what we would be if the rest of the year continues along this path. Let's see here, the $1 million in brackets, and I was kind of laughing a little bit with Jim because I was asking his pardon for using a accounting affectation in a non-accounting way, but really what it's meant to indicate there is the one in brackets is basically what you'd call a negative expense, or those operational accounts that I was talking about, or operational cuts that I was talking about. So that would add revenue, not in a revenue sense, but in a reduced expense sense. Then the 3 million that would get us to the 101.6 is from that second portion of the property tax increase that I was talking about. And the 2.5, which I only show in red because I wanted to differentiate it from ongoing operational money, would be the fund balance contribution that it would take us to get to that raised status that would match Taylorsville and Salt Lake. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great.
Councilman Fatissimo raised his hand on.
Oh, okay, we'll turn the time over to Councilman Fitzgerald. Did you have a question? Or are you just saying you're here?
Oh, he might be in the other.
Jake, did you have a comment?
Sorry,
They
I
let
just
you
got
in?
added. I was just
Okay.
raising my hand to get added as a panelist, and yeah, I'm present now. Hello, everyone.
Thank you. All right, any further questions for Mr. Pyle? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to our private street standards, and Mr. Pastrick will be taking care of that. Thank you, Mr. Pyle.
Thank you. Just pulling up the presentation again here. All right, so this presentation is in response to some concerns of the council made several weeks ago about private streets and whether or not the city should allow private streets. And so I wanted to provide some information for the council to consider. We don't have any formal recommendations, just really more trying to provide information. So wanted to, again, provide some background. So we actually have private streets in a number of different development types, commercial and industrial. Now those are less frequent, but there are a few examples. And of course, most private streets are for residential. And I think it's important to point out the difference. So we do have private streets where I'll call those one owner. So for example, you have a mobile home park that's owned by a single entity, but there are still homes addressed off those streets. And then you have the more common private street of an association where you have either a homeowners association, or you may have a group of owners that collectively own and maintain a street. So those, you can see all the scenarios there for residential and the typical either single owner or association for the different use types. This map here just kind of gives you an idea of where those private streets are located and then how much they make of the overall city. And so hopefully you can make out the colors here. So the blue would be city-owned streets, which make up the majority. The green would be private streets that are single owner. So again, thinking about mobile home parks and apartment complexes. The red would be private streets that are an association. And then you do have, of course, UDOT owned streets like, 215, 35th South, for example. And then in the bottom of the slide, you can see the mileage there. So you can see how much private streets make up compared to city streets. So certainly in the minority there. Wanted to provide some examples. So and all of these examples would be more of the association type streets. So this is Sunset Hills, a development that's out at 6600 South, just west of SR 111. So the street along the south side there, of course, is public, but then you can see these kind of hammerhead streets. Those are all private streets. Here's another example. This is a senior condo development. This is on the east side of 7200 West, and then 31st South is at the top, and then the streets internal there are private. And then here's a townhome example where this one's interesting. So the road that runs through kind of cuts through the middle here, this is actually a public street here that goes up and then ties into a neighborhood to the north. But then these streets internal are private. And I think this slide, I think, helps illustrate why, at least in my view, I think it's a private street in this case is helpful in that you can see this road here where you have the garages accessing doesn't have sidewalk like you would have on a public street because there are sidewalks along the public street to the south and then sidewalks in the common area to the north. So in that case, this particular private street doesn't have sidewalk for that reason. You also have here these kind of stubs, if you will, that are shorter than what would require a fire turnaround. So those, again, are private on the north end there, and you have a couple of on the east end. I want to give you some examples. These are typical public street cross sections, but to clarify, the one at the top has been our standard for a number of years. So the 54-foot right-of-way, That's what we use for a new subdivision. So that's the standard cross-section we've been using for many years. The one on the bottom left, we've used in very limited situations where you may have a very short cul-de-sac. And so it's essentially the same cross-section, just less the park strip. But again, used very infrequently. The bottom right is actually what we have probably the most of in the city, and that's the standard that was used by the county before the city incorporated. And then I believe it was used also for a time by the city until our standards changed later. So you can see the point of this slide is we have had different public street cross sections over the years. I wanted to provide a couple of private street examples, and just to give you an idea, these three examples are just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, there's all different kinds of private street configurations. The one at the top is the Villages of 27th. You may recall that's the project that is on the west side of 27th West at about 45th South across the street from the UDOT complex there. You can see in that case, it's a total of 46 feet. So that one's pretty similar to a public street, a little bit narrower. Then the one at the bottom left would be the Villages of Westridge. That corresponds with the image I showed earlier. You can just see the details there. And then the Bingham Point would be that senior condo development. You can see the cross-section that's used in that project. So why would we want to allow private streets? Some benefits from our perspective. So it does allow for design flexibility, especially when you have lots that are maybe awkward shape or smaller, at which we're facing a lot more of that now as the city fills in. A lot of the good stuff, so to speak, has been developed, and we're left developing some of the more challenging pieces. It reduces the city's pavement maintenance in that the city's not maintaining those streets, the private associations would be. And then similarly, we're not removing snow or collecting garbage on those streets. And I think it's important to point out too that we have our snow plows that are larger and garbage pickup that's larger trucks. And on public streets, those are wider cross sections, right? And so a little more maneuvering room. So by having the private associations take care of that, they can have equipment that's maybe a little more geared toward that size of a street. The next point here is, and I think this is an important one, is in our code, we have certain curb cut spacing. So you have to have so many feet between driveways. And if for a townhome project, it would not meet those standards to be on a public street. So the driveway spacing is too tight. So if we were to allow or require public streets, it would either preclude more townhomes, or we would have to change the code so that the driveways could be closer together, if that makes sense. And then lastly, when it comes to just the control and enforcement of parking, that would be left to a private entity. Now, the flip side, the negatives, as we've talked about here, or the council's brought up, that you have the property owners are having to pay fees for the maintenance. They usually, and maybe this could be a good or a bad thing, depending on your perspective, they usually do prohibit on-street parking. They're not required to build to any kind of specification other than just meeting fire code. And then again, as I alluded to earlier, is that they tend to be narrower usually and have tighter curbs. So it makes it a little more tricky doing, again, snow removal and garbage pickup. So those are some of the negatives we saw. Now, before getting into these numbers, I wanted to clarify, we're not in any way suggesting this scenario. However, it was a number of years ago, we had a similar presentation to the council where the council had asked, well, what would it cost to take over private streets, in terms of maintenance and taking care of them? So we provide this for information. Again, we're not suggesting this, but in working with Public Works, if we were to, resurface all the private streets, reconstruct those, estimate of $34 million. Then the ongoing maintenance, if we were to take those over, and to clarify, I'm talking about the association private streets. So this would not include the ones in mobile home parks where it's a single owner, okay? So 1.7 million every 6 years for ongoing maintenance. And then for snow plowing, we would need an additional vehicle. That's where the one-time money is. And then 40,000 ongoing for snow plowing, if we were to do that. So here are some suggestions. Again, council may not want to do anything here, but one that seemed to be a little bit more low-hanging fruit would be we could require that private streets are constructed more like public streets in terms of the actual composition of the road. So not necessarily the width, but more the depth of the asphalt and the compaction, right? More of the technical aspects, so that that the homeowners association is getting, we're ensuring that they're getting a higher quality product that's built up front. Okay.
So we're not inspecting those roads right now?
We don't, not private streets. We do not.
Okay.
And again, there are no standards for those types of specifications. Now, it would have to meet fire code requirements, but beyond that, we don't have specifications that way. Now, another option would be we could have a new public street cross-section that we would allow in certain instances, like an infill project or a townhome project, where we would have a slightly narrower amount of pavement, and then just have a park strip and sidewalk on one side of the street, which is what we see in some townhome developments. They'll do that on private streets. If we were to do that second point, the third point would need to accompany that, and that would be to allow for tighter driveway spacing. Because again, right now, if we were to require public streets in a townhome development, the curb cut spacing just wouldn't work based on what's in the ordinance. So again, we just included a few of these as potential options, but not sure what the council's pleasure there or your what direction you'd like to go.
I would love to see a lot of things, but 29 foot of pavement in any street that we approve, whether it's private or public. When people are parking, I just take my brother's street, for example, in Sugar Plum, and it's probably 26, and you got people parked on both sides, and you couldn't get a fire truck through there with some of those curves. And so I think 29 feet ought to be our minimum for pavement. But that's not really public or private. That's just whatever we do.
Well, Steve, thank you for bringing it up. I appreciate it very much. It seemed like after hearing your information, I don't want to take over private streets, cost so much money.
Yeah, that's not the question.
Yeah, we don't want to
Okay.
take them over.
Okay.
That's good.
Yeah, but here, I think that the suggestion you have right there, I think is very good. Compact, make the road strong, healthy, and have to maybe the agreement with the city and we inspection or do something, as before they done their job or something. Right now, we don't do that, right?
Right.
Okay, so we gotta monitor that closely and put it on a paper. And like Scott said, get the wide one, the bigger one, the longer one, the width, so we can have a flower truck and go in there.
I think that private streets, when there's an association, it's just troubling.
Understand? Yep.
And for future development, we should do whatever we can to limit that, I think. But I didn't think about these developments that are, that have sidewalk on one side and garage kind of an alley in the back. Maybe for those, it makes sense to keep that private, that part, like the ones at West Ridge. I don't know though. What do you guys think?
Well, my question is how many cars are parked on public streets outside of the association because they don't have wide enough streets. And they're a burden to the other residents around them and businesses around them. So that's why I personally would like all future streets to be public. If there's a backloading alley, that's different than like the sidewalk was in front of the house and there was a public road, and that needs to be wide enough to accommodate parking. Because I think, for me, I don't know what brought it up for you, but for me, it was all the on-street parking outside of the associations that are putting burden on other residents and not keeping themselves contained to their own association.
And for me, the disparity between the benefits that some residents are getting versus others. I mean, people who live in these associations with private road, they're paying the same amount of taxes that the rest of us are paying. And yet the rest of us have a public road that's taken care of by our taxes. They have to pay more because they're stuck with this private road. Yeah, and I'm worried about 30 years from now, when the association didn't plan enough to replace the pavement when it needs to be replaced, and the whole neighborhood going to pot.
Especially when there aren't standards for their
Exactly.
roads.
Yeah,
Mm.
now that we know they're not being inspected, that gives me more pause.
But I'm willing to accept the change in our ordinance to allow for tighter driveway spacing on public streets, especially for townhome developments. And maybe for those backloaded garages, to allow that public
Private.
street to be narrower as well. I don't know.
Or consider that alley as part of the driveway. When it's
Yeah.
just alley only.
Like a shared driveway.
Yeah, shared driveway back to have everybody load.
Yeah,
We could maybe distinguish it. That's maybe a Steve or somebody else question.
Then limit the length of those, and so it can't just be a big loop, or.
Oh, yeah, true.
Right, that was my thought, would be maybe it's a distance. If
Right.
it's no more than a certain distance, then it can be more of just a shared driveway.
Mhm.
But we also give an option to the infill lots. They have maybe 2 houses, 3 houses.
yeah.
Yeah, we have to consider about that too. What I'm
Right,
saying? They have-
so a flag lot would still have a private
Yeah.
driveway.
Mhm.
But I think it goes back to your point on association properties are where we really have the concern. It's not 2 owners sharing a flag lot, or it's the association type situations.
Yeah, I'm more inclined to all the association.
Yeah.
Types.
And you mentioned the benefits, the private street benefits. It allows for design flexibility, but that's really benefiting the developer. Doesn't really benefit the residents or for us, really. It's just.
I mean,
They're
it
gonna have to get more
does
creative.
allow for more residents to be there, I guess, and that's a benefit, but you're right, it's the developer who gets most of that benefit.
Yeah.
And it says reduces the city's pavement maintenance, but really it transfers the maintenance to just a small group.
Right. And then end up paying twice for it. Through their taxes and through the association.
Are there restrictions? So I'm thinking, you mentioned the snow removal there. If they have a private street, they have a smaller either truck or ATV or something to remove snow. But I've seen instances where they just push the snow out into the public streets. And that makes it difficult to get through until the snowplows come through and remove that. And they're doing it out of necessity. They don't really have anywhere to put it, especially if it's a lot of snow. Are there restrictions on moving snow off of private onto public street?
Yes.
Yeah, that's illegal.
As maybe Kobe can, I don't know if he knows the specifics on that, but
So I don't know there, I don't know in code if it's said that they can't push from private streets into public streets. I do know in this situation where some of the reason we have the design standards that we have in those subdivisions, so we could actually have a place to push snow to. So some of these examples he's showing like hammerheads or these private little alleys that go and light load in there. I mean, that'd be very, very troublesome to very time consuming to try to get snowplows in there and maneuver and actually remove all of that stuff. So that's why we have some of the requirements we have on our city roads. So snowplows can turn around and make that movement without getting stuck in a small development for a long time trying to remove the snow.
and another thought too, just when you have, imagine for a minute, if you have lots of driveways, normally if you're plowing a street with single family homes, you plow the snow and you've got, you'll block a driveway on occasion, they can just move that. Well, now if you've got all driveways lined up and you're pushing that snow, you're just pushing, one neighbor's pushing it in front of the other neighbor's driveway. There's just not as much space along the street to actually stack it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, but they can dig out their driveway like I dig out my driveway.
Yeah, I have to dig out
One
mine
shovel at a
too.
time.
Yeah.
So it's just taking care of your own driveway. I mean, that's just part of having a driveway. I'm not as worried about that as. So maybe the private drives, if they take care of those themselves and we're not cleaning out those driveways as far as the alley loaded.
So allow private
Or the alley load.
alley loaded streets.
That's what I don't know.
It is akin to a driveway.
So maybe make those public too then. And then it's easier for our guys to just plow it. And not, oh, that's private, that's public, that's private, that's public. Just plow the whole thing and be done. But do it in a designed, be more mindful of the design in the future and probably have to change our standards a bit so they can make it work.
So one example that I just drove by yesterday that I think you mentioned, Mayor, is Daybury Drive. Which is right there, between Target and the fitness center. You go through there and they have private drives on, looks like Fairground and Asbury, but they all park on Daybury and it's pretty tight getting through there.
It is.
And that private road kind of loops around and back and forth. And if we just limited that to a certain distance and as alleyway, it would, I don't know if it would help, but.
Well, I'm willing to move forward with asking staff to come back with an alternative of what we could do if the majority is liking the idea of private or public roads instead of private roads, and just change our design standards and the ordinance to allow for tighter driveways in those certain circumstances.
And again, this just applies to forthcoming or future developments and not a retroactive mandate for existing properties, correct?
Right.
I'm cool with that.
And make sure that our Public Works has looked at whatever is drafted and okays it too for making sure it'll work with snowplows.
So just for our benefit, would there be any scenario, again, using this example here, where you would want to look at still these kind of these shorter stubs, for example, here on the east end or up here on the north end? Or we're saying we don't want to have any shared type scenario like that?
For me personally, I say none, just because of what Kobe said about the snow plowing. I think it's just easier to have the whole thing, but what's
But I
everybody
think
else's feeling?
Kobe's saying that it's better to have those private because it would be too hard for our big plows to do that. Is that what
I
you're
mean-
saying?
Yeah, so in a situation like this, all of those dead end roads right there, it's very difficult for plows to get in and back up and actually put snow somewhere. So in a situation like this, if it's a circular loop somewhere, that's pretty easy for a plow to go in and take care of. But all these little side streets at dead end, that's where it becomes troublesome. So, potentially a scenario where the circular traffic route is public, but these little dead end streets are private, or we just have to increase what the standards of these dead end roads to make it so snowplows can get in there and turn around.
Maybe give them more space at the end.
Right. And I
Okay.
think that goes back to what Steve was saying with, those types of private roads do provide more flexibility for some of these infill lots to actually develop them. Whereas if we require a cul-de-sac or some type of turning movement at the end of each dead end road, then that really takes a lot of the developable space away from the parcel.
So in this scenario, perhaps this road here, the loops around would be public, but then these spurs, if you will, would be private, again, potentially under this scenario.
So to limit the length on private streets.
And maybe change the design standards so they have more space at the end, which would be good because then that would put them a little bit further away from the residents that surround them if they had some extra space to pile the snow up at the end of those.
Yeah, they can take two lots out at the end of the road and they can still go around and they'd be just fine. In the future, we plan to do that, you know what I'm saying? So they don't have to head to the end of the road and they stuck and have to back the truck and it gets a problem, hit the other car or maybe something, take two lots out, still go around.
And I guess without knowing the actual ordinance, you can't say how that development would have changed. But I think if we put it in place, then the developments will figure out how to position the buildings so that the snow removal is doable. I think looking at an existing one and trying to figure out how to back design it might be a little difficult.
We limited the length of those private spurs. But then also limit percentage, because I'm afraid that if we say, oh, you can only have private on these spurs, then they make everything a spur, right?
Right? That's why everything public just makes it easy
Yeah.
and leave it up to them to figure out how to make it work. Developers are pretty smart.
They are.
I think they can figure it out.
So make everything that would be owned by an association have to be public. Is that what you're suggesting?
I think so, yeah.
And maybe adjust some of the standards so townhome developments could still work.
Yeah, and just make the condos, the single unit dwellings that are in association and the townhomes. Those are our biggest concerns. Is everybody good with sending Mr. Pastrick back to
Draft an ordinance?
draft an ordinance? Yeah.
Yeah, let's look at it.
Yeah, I'm okay with that.
Okay,
Do you have enough information, you think?
I believe so. So I'll just recap, looking at this slide. So we won't need option one because we won't allow private streets anymore.
correct.
Then option two would be, we will come up with kind of this alternative cross section, although it would be 29 feet of asphalt as opposed to 26. So it would be the same as what we're using in any residential street. And then we would also do item number 3, which would allow for tighter driveway spacing on a townhome development. I do have one maybe just related question, if I can, for my benefit. So the council may recall about a month ago, we changed the parking standards for townhomes to require, so it was we already had two spaces in the garage that we required a driveway big enough to park in. We also did another 0.75 and I think the thought at the time was that most of these developments were private streets where you could not park on the street. Well, in this situation, now we're creating public streets. So anyway, just wondering if that's another wrinkle we want to look at, or if we want to just keep it the same way.
Well, in closing, I was going to say, you'll probably find one or two other things that we need to change to make this work. And so I would think
Okay.
after we see how this is put together, then we may just take away that 0.75.
Gotcha.
But that's just my personal. Anybody else have an inkling to?
I don't know if we can have enough parking
I know.
in some of these developments, so I guess we'll
Sure.
see how it goes.
And one other just clarifying question. Do the council want to see a draft before we formally start with the planning commission, or should we start with a draft with planning, start the official adoption process?
We gotta see a draft first.
Draft.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we see enough drafts.
Okay,
One
great.
other clarifying question. Are we completely closing the door on private streets? So we mentioned these flagship lots where one or two builders. Are we leaving that option open or?
It's just
So
for
It's not an
association.
association.
Right, so a flag lot, in that scenario, it's a one owner situation where the stem for the driveway is actually part of an owner's lot. And so in that case, it's not really a private street, but just part of their lot, and it's their private driveway essentially.
They still have to drag their garbage can clear out to the private road, correct?
Right.
No garbage, no, public street, yeah.
Yeah.
Clear out to 3,200 or whatever it is. Okay,
Is there any precedent for a situation where a development agreement or development was initiated as a single owner and transitioned into an association, or vice versa? Or is that not an option?
Condo conversions.
I have seen, yeah, we have examples. I can't think of names right off the top of my head, but we've had actually both scenarios where you've had a condo conversion, and then we've had a couple of scenarios where something was built as a condo development, but then there's essentially one owner owning everything. So even though it's platted as condos, it's really an apartment development. So we've seen both scenarios.
okay, no more questions? Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
We have our public works upcoming projects. Mr. Wilson?
All right, good afternoon. Kobe Wilson with the Engineering Division, and I'm grateful for the opportunity which I have to talk to you, Mayor and Council, to give you an idea of our upcoming projects that you'll be seeing this summer, this construction season, as well as some other projects that we are working on. So the website that we're looking at here, this is just on the engineering webpage. This is a public site just on our city website, so the public can get in here and see the stuff that we have planned coming and who the best contact is if they have any questions on these projects. So we're just going to go through here, take a look at some of these projects. Some of them you are familiar with. Some of them may be a little bit newer to some of you. But as we scroll down through here, our first project, as you know, we started the third phase of Beagley Road last fall, well, actually last summer. They made quite a bit of progress last year with all the underground utilities. Those are all in place now. And as soon as things warm up, they're actually planning on being back out here in a couple of weeks to actually get started on the roadway. So this will be a concrete road that extends Beagley Lane from where we ended it in our last phase. And this road will actually wrap around and go up to the north and tie into the intersection of 2400 South. So it will give us that connectivity there. So this is a good project. Several phases of this project over the last few years. So this will be good to actually have a connection point now. So we anticipate that one will be wrapped up early summer, midsummer.
May I ask a question? Where do I find this on the website? 'Cause I'm
So if
struggling.
you, yep, let me actually just,
Sorry.
let me just show you real quick.
Link to it.
Yeah, Nicole sent a link earlier.
So
Emails.
just in case you want to find it in the future, if you just come into the Public Works Department on our website and then go into the engineering page, you can either find this link on road construction or maps, either one of those. And if you click on it, it's just going to tell you the interactive map for our West Valley City projects. So feel free to hop onto this anytime you want to get an idea of projects that we have in the pipeline.
Okay, thank you.
You bet. So that's pretty much on Beagley. We'll start hopping through these. If you have questions, feel free to interrupt me. The next project that got started last year that we expect to be wrapped up midsummer is our 2700 West project from 4100 South to 4700 South. This one's had a lot of challenges over the winter with utility conflicts. As you know, we're installing the same privacy wall that we installed basically from Lancer Way down to 4100 South. In excavating, there were a lot of utilities that were not exactly where everyone thought they were. So we've spent all winter basically trying to get utilities out of the way. Fortunately, the last utility company, CenturyLink, is now on site to get their stuff out of the way. And we're expecting about 2 more weeks for them to get relocated. The good news is, obviously, this has been a good time to have these conflicts during the winter where we can't do a lot of heavy construction. And it has allowed that privacy wall to all be cast. So the wall is now cast and ready to be installed. So we should see that wall starting to go up probably by the end of March.
Now we have an updated map of where those utilities are.
We definitely have a better idea of where those third-party utilities are, yes. All right, moving down, Stanton Drive, again, a project that we started last fall due to just the concrete pipe supply issue. It took a long time for them to actually get pipe last fall, which we knew when we bid the project. We knew we would have a winter suspension. They made pretty good progress last fall before they buttoned everything up. And they'd planned on being back out on site this week. I think they've moved some equipment out there, but with the storm, they're a few days behind. So they'll probably get started with actual construction next week on Stanton Drive. And that should be wrapped up the end of April.
They have totally shut down the road
This week.
yesterday and today. Yep.
Okay. Yep, we expected them to be out there this week, so maybe they'll brave the storm tomorrow. We'll see. But I'm guessing you won't see much until Thursday or Friday. Moving down 47th, we've talked about this project a lot. You'll be happy to know that while you studied one of our last parcels today, early on the consent agenda. And next week, we'll be bringing the final West Valley City parcel to you, and that will clear all of the right of way in West Valley City, which will enable us to move forward and advertise this project. Through the UDOT process, once it's actually submitted, it takes about 2 months from the time it's submitted to where a contractor shows up. So we will expect a contractor out there probably in June. If you've been down there recently, you know we're actually working on the box culvert over the canal right now, and Rocky Mountain Power is on site bearing their utilities. So
Do you know when the canal is going to be done, the canal portion?
so the canal is under contract. They're required to be done by April 15th, at least with enough to get the water through the canal. They've worked closely with the canal company, and the canal company's feeling pretty confident they can give them a few extra weeks if they need it this year. But nonetheless, they're supposed to be out of there by April 15th. And when I say out of there, just out of the canal, they'll still have some cleanup work to do after April 15th.
We don't have water to put the canal.
That's probably very true, which is why they're probably going to be a little bit flexible with us this year. So, all right, moving down, we have our 3500 South sidewalk project. This is just a small project at 5200 West. We got some state money to extend this sidewalk on the north side of 3500 South. We're also going to be doing some drainage improvements and some pedestrian ramp improvements as well with this, but we've had our pre-construction meeting on this, and so you'll see activity on this one very soon. The first ped ramp project, this one is the one that was funded with CDBG money. Again, we just had a pre-construction meeting. Contractors should be out there working on these ped ramps within the next week or two. You will see another ped ramp project coming soon. This one is advertised right now. about the same number of pedestrian ramps, around 35 to 40 pedestrian ramps in each of these projects. The big difference is that first project had federal funding, which has different contract requirements. That's why that one was advertised separately. Those projects are typically a little bit more expensive. This project is all local funds. So this one will be advertised. I think our bid opening's in about 2 weeks on this project. Yes.
So do we have two different standards we pour the ramps to?
Our construction standards are identical.
Okay.
Contract requirements are different just with the federal money.
Okay,
So,
but the finished project's the same.
yep, correct.
Thank you.
More hoops to jump through for a federal project.
Yeah.
All right, moving down, we talked a little bit about 3100 South a couple weeks ago. We are getting some state money for this as well to contribute. And then this is going to also be the Public Works main overlay project this year. So this will be from 5600 West to essentially the concrete pavement on Bangerter. So we'll be adding bike lanes throughout the corridor and a new surface. Then we have our annual just thin surface treatment. This is our slurry seals and our polymer seals that we do every year. So this is just our overall kind of maintenance preservation project that we do annually. One that you probably haven't seen, we have a little storm drain, well, it'll be a little over $500,000, probably $750,000, but this is a storm drain project out on 2700 West. We have this development, this Roxborough development out here on the west that has traditionally always lacked in drainage infrastructure. In addition to that, we have a open channel ditch basically up here on the state property where most of our city storm drain drains to. It's kind of a maintenance problem with all of the vegetation and everything inside the ditch. So, and there's some development happening on that property as well. So for maintenance reasons, we need to get this piped. It's been a project that we've kind of had in the pipeline for a while. So we're going to move on this one so that we can actually connect this Roxborough development, pick up some additional drainage on 2700 West. The inlet spacing on 2700 West is fairly far apart. So add a few inlets there and then connect it out to a drain that is close to 215. So this is one of our storm drain projects that we'll be working on this year.
So Kobe,
Yep.
Taylorsville is going to do some road improvements or add a new road, something down in that area.
Mhm.
Is this anywhere near that?
Yep, that's a good question. In fact, this storm drain will end up being right underneath that road. We've worked with Taylorsville a little bit. In fact, the storm drain will end up in Taylorsville property. They're going to allow us to use their, put it on their side of the road. It does pick up 1 or 2 inlets on their side of the road, but the majority of the project is to pick up the Roxborough development and get it out to 215.
Okay, thank you.
All right, then Crystal Avenue Sidewalk. As you know, we received some Safe Routes to School funds a while back. The main purpose of this project is to get a sidewalk out there on Crystal Avenue from Leicester Street to Hempstead Street. So we are working on the design right now and some options and alternatives as to how we want to get that sidewalk built on this corridor. Crosstown Trail, this is basically to extend the Crosstown Trail from 2700 West out to Bangerter Highway. With the future Bangerter interchange project coming, there's a good chance that instead of going all the way to the highway, Bangerter will actually probably end it at the first intersection to the east there, just so that we're not installing something that's going to be ripped out here in the future with the Bangerter interchange. The main purpose of this project, we have a few sidewalk gaps, so we'll fill in those gaps for pedestrians, and then we'll add bike lanes out on Parkway Boulevard. So there are facilities for both pedestrians and bicyclists. So we actually have applied for a little bit more funding on this through the WFRC TAP program, and so we'll find out if we get those funds later next month, if we're recommended to get those funds later next month, which would help us kind of streamline this project. But we do have the environmental document done on this. We're just going to wait to see what kind of funding we get later this spring. Parkway Boulevard. So we talked about this one not very long ago either. This is Parkway, a widening and full depth reconstruction from Mountain View Corridor to 6400 West. This will widen the facility out to a 5-lane facility with bike lanes, curb and gutter, sidewalk, streetlights. This is a good project for us, federally funded through the STP program. The environmental document on this one is done, and we actually just selected a design consultant yesterday. So we're just getting the contract in place with that design consultant, and then we will try to hit the ground running on the design with this so that we can hopefully get this constructed next year. It's always challenging when you're dealing with a lot of right-of-way parcels and utilities. So I don't want to promise next year, but our goal right now is next year. So that's what we're shooting for. Lancer Way. So this is also federally funded right out here in front of City Hall to get us from 2700 West to 3200 West. This is also a full depth reconstruction project. So everything will be replaced. The entire pavement section. We'll be adding curb, gutter, sidewalk, street lighting, drainage improvements, and yeah, do the full project from 2700 West to 3200 West. Timeframe from this one is probably 2024 to 2025 construction. We have met with WFRC. They're going to advance some funds so we can do the environmental document this year. That doesn't take a lot. The city actually is required to cover the cost for the environmental document, but it also requires some support from UDOT. So they advance a little bit of money for the UDOT staff basically to participate in that environmental document. And they have also told us that if we streamline the design, they could probably move some funds up so that we could build it a little bit earlier if need be. But technically on the STIP, I don't think it's programmed until 2025, 2026, but we should be able to build it earlier than that. And I think that is all that we had to talk about today. So happy to answer any questions.
On the Stanton storm drain one, I think third one down. It mentions in the description that the storm drain is deteriorated to a point of failure. Is that a ongoing problem? Like why is that deteriorating, and there's going to be more of that?
So I would love to tell you this was an isolated incident on Stanton Drive. But what it really comes down to, we have a lot of these issues throughout the city. It's old corrugated metal pipe that was installed back with the original drainage system. So basically all the pipe that was installed 30 or 40 years ago was usually the corrugated metal pipe that is all kind of rusted out and loses its bottom and just is to the point of failure. So anytime we put new pipe in the ground now, it's reinforced concrete pipe, which has a lot longer life expectancy. So even on these overlay projects like 3100 South that we're doing, when we go in there to put a new surface on 3100 South, we'll identify all the corrugated metal pipe in that corridor, and we'll go and replace it as part of the project. So this summer, you'll see storm drain work on 3100 South as well. We'll go replace all of the old pipe before we overlay the road.
Did we put new pipe in there when we did the last reconstruction on 31? It was about the same time we built the fitness center, so it's been a while.
So I'm thinking I think it was before my time, but I think it's between like 48th and 40th. Does that sound right? I believe that 40th to 48th was reconstructed much more recent than 40th to 56th anyways.
Right, yes.
So from 40th to 48th, yes, that all should be decent pipe. The only caveat I guess I would say to that is at that particular time, that CMP pipe may have been in fairly decent shape. And so it wasn't replaced with the project. So I do think that the majority of it is RCP, but there might still be some CMP in there that we have to replace.
Okay. And just a little bit extra on Stanton, that pipe stopped and didn't even go out to 3100 until it kind of went around a corner and then through people's backyards. So this will put it all in a public street instead of under people's yards and houses. Yes. It was quite.
And down here on the south end too, we have some storm drain that basically follows property lines up and then into a backyard and then back out to Stanton. So we are, with this reconstruction project, we are eliminating all of those, and all of the storm drain will be out of the public right away.
Yep, because that house right there on the corner gets about, so right where you're, nope.
Oh,
The one on Stanton that faces east.
this guy.
Yeah, it floods their front yard a good 3 feet deep on the road in the gutter when it rains heavy.
Hmm.
So and a lot of the kids in the neighborhood are disappointed that that's gonna go away.
We're dream killers, fun killers.
Yeah, it was like, oh, fine, take away our fun,
Mm.
but
Yep.
Splash pad somewhere in there.
yeah.
So yeah, and we are, to that point as well, we're adding a few more inlets on this road as well to unfortunately take away the small children's streams, so.
Yeah, that's all right. The adults will be happy.
Yeah.
Cause
Any
you
other-
have to drive through that 3 feet of water.
Now we're taking away the teenager streams,
Yeah.
so, no, I'm just kidding. Yeah, no, we're excited for Stanton Drive. It's been a good project. The contractor has performed fairly well on this project. We were happy with how they cleaned it up for the winter time. Sometimes that's always a fight when you suspend a project, that it's just a mess throughout the winter, but they did a pretty good job cleaning it up, and they're coming back out to make a mess for about 6 more weeks, but hopefully it'll be left in good shape when they're done.
So you think how much we're gonna spend for this year, those projects we're planning to do this year?
Ooh, for all of these projects for this year,
I know some is at 2023, some at 2024, some have some of the money from the Fed. But
Right.
Just for our end, our city for this year, see how much we're gonna spend.
that's a very good question. And a lot of it depends on some of the scope that we end up chasing with some of these projects that are early in design right now. Some of them have the risk of scope creep, just because of, once we get into, for example, 3100 South, initially we had planned on spending about 2 million on 3100 South. As we got into it and we thought, different limits kind of extended to catch where pavement's kind of in bad shape, or the CMP pipe, once we analyze that stuff, it definitely increases that. So we're looking at over $3 million now for 3100 South. We're actually about 3.4 million of that 3.4 million, about 750 of that is coming from the state. So that project alone is about 2.5 million. 2700 West is about 2 million of city funds. 4700 South is 7 million of city funds. So I would say roughly of city funds this year, we're probably looking in the 14 to 15 $million range. So. And again, some of that, we have state funds, we have federal funds, we have different funding sources coming in. So.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Thank you.
Thank you.
Very well done and very well prepared. Okay, we'll now turn the time over to Ms. Cottle for our legislative update. We're wrapped up. It's over, right?
Are you sure you guys don't need a donut before I?
There's plenty of donuts over there.
Some extra sugar, carbs, anybody? Okay, Nicole Cottle. Whew. Okay, so sorry about the little hitch on our spreadsheet. And you might be wondering why I sent it that way instead of in the more Reader Digest version that we've been having all week or all month, all session. And the reason I sent that is now, probably from about here on out in your paths as city council members, you'll hear lots of legislative updates and have lots of legislative meetings and probably be asked some questions about various bills. And so I wanted to try to put it in a format that's very user-friendly for you and also easy access to, did this pass, did this not pass? You'll have a lot of those kinds of things asked of you. So I tried to do the list just very straightforward, the title of the bill, and then the green is passed, the pinkish is not passed. So you can just have a quick, easy access to that. So hopefully that helps. I keep this in this format for myself and have for all these years because that's what happens to me. So someone will say, hey, what about Representative Winder's 466? And I'll be like, 466, I don't know, did it pass, did it not pass? So I can quickly have this reference guide. And hopefully that helps you as well. Just a few of the updates I'll give and then I can answer any questions. The bill that we focused most intently on towards the last of the session was the homeless shelter bill. That bill, as you're well aware as a council, had left us with some pretty significant concerns as it was being passed and also as it did pass. Basically twofold. The first is, of course, there was lots of mechanics with regards to that bill and which cities might be required or preempted by the state to take a temporary shelter, and what those numbers look like, who was setting those numbers, and what were we talking about for parameters. There was a lot of discussion at the session about that not being a temporary facility, but rather a permanent facility. In the end, the way the bill passed is the Conference of Mayors has the opportunity to provide some options for a temporary shelter. The decision as to whether a temporary shelter is needed and what the numbers will be is made by the Office of Homeless Services, which is different than it has been in the past. We pushed for that quite significantly, still aren't fully satisfied with the way the process works, but we, West Valley City, based on the way our task force operates and based on the data that we have, want to understand what those numbers really are and whether a shelter, temporary shelter, really is necessary or not. And those numbers are hard to come by in a way that makes sense and that is appropriate. And so we really pushed for that decision to be made at the state level with Wayne Niederhauser rather than at the provider level. So of course they'll provide input and information, but that will be made by him. And then those numbers will be filtered down to the COM, who has the opportunity all together in a room to do what we affectionately call Lord of Flies and try to figure out where those might be available, those locations. That discussion has been rough so far. I will tell you at the legislative session, there are a lot of cities in this county that don't think that they have any opportunity to provide those services. And so I think that's going to be a really tough conversation to have. In addition, towards the end of the session, there were several things put into the bill, like spacing limitations. So 1,000 feet from community uses like churches and otherwise, and 600 feet from residential. As you might imagine, what that makes our map look like is definitely interesting, given that we've got a lot of all of those. And I don't think that sometimes you're exactly clear on how many of those we have, but we have a lot of those. And so from an opportunity to locate perspective, the opportunities are small here in the city. From an argument perspective, as you know, the argument we've made and will continue to make is we do a very heavy lift here already. And we have the 2 pages that you've seen of facilities and locations. We have all of the funds that we've spent and verified, the $6 million a year that we verified to the state with regards to our homeless services upkeep and help. And so I think that will be our ongoing discussion as well, but there is definitely going to be a conversation. There's definitely the risk. And by the way, as we talked about last week, there has always been a risk that the state would come in and preempt us and put it where it wants to have it. That was what the issue was last time and probably will be what it is this time, that the state will ultimately have to just put that where they decide it needs to be. And that's a really tough thing. So for what it's worth, I think the conversation got healthier towards the end of the session. I think that the folks that are engaged in this work do recognize that West Valley City is a heavy lifter, both on the front end and the back end. And that was really a lot of the conversation that we were having. People don't really realize. It's interesting to watch some of the articles that have come out afterwards about what people foresee, including the Salt Lake City mayor and others, as the true solution to affordable housing or to homelessness is affordable housing. And just by coincidence, we're the largest provider of that service in the county as it sits in all forms. Salt Lake's close on our heels because they've been building a lot. But when it comes to the true 30% AMI or below, or those truly affordable units that make a difference in this discussion, we are truly the solution to that. And so as we endeavor to go forward, a lot of the pressure is going to fall on our fine mayor here at COM to carry our word and to have the discussion there. And then we'll see how this proceeds. But as the bill finished up and finalized up, just based on the fact of our composition as a city, we're in pretty good stead from that perspective. So certainly want to engage in that, as I think those of you that have been with Homeless Task Force recognize we're in this for the long haul and to do it the right way. And that's the argument we made up there as well. I will say that our legislators in the House in particular, when we needed them to make a statement, they definitely did that. They definitely stood up. They stood up and made in fact, Mike Winder ran an amendment that failed in the House. I think we mentioned that last week, but very different reception to our request than the last go around, which was really a hard thing. And it's hard for our legislators to do it in the face of a lot of leadership pressure and otherwise, and I appreciated their willingness to do that. And then frankly, take it on the chin from folks who don't understand and don't have all the facts. And that's what happened after they made those statements on the floor. And so it was a good way to put the real conversation out there, help people understand where West Valley City is as a city, and a good conversation that way. The other couple that I will say, there were a lot of land use bills, a lot of passed and a lot of those that didn't pass. We could go through those and I can answer any questions, but there are a lot. The good news about all those, as I've been saying all along, is we already comply with 99.7% of all of those. Steve has to buff up our general plan for about 10 minutes and then send it over to Wasatch Front to sign off on. So we'll get that done. But the rest of those are fine. We were following about 30 sustainability bills, as you heard me mention. The vast majority of those did not pass, and those went all the way from green buses to EV charging stations in associations. And there's a wide array of those, and those are all on the list as well. Happy to answer any questions about bills. Like I say, typically now for about a month, you'll out there in your worlds get asked a lot. So happy to help in that situation too, but hopefully our tracker at least gives you a quick reference. So if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, ma'am. Go back to the homeless case. We run into the circle again. You hear anything about they studying maybe somehow, some way, bring the homeless people outside the city center a little bit, maybe in Bluffdale and other cities outside a little bit, suburban, and talking about so what impact in the economy in the city. For example, I give you an example, like 200 South or 300 South in Salt Lake City and Main Street. One of the building, really nice building, but now they just went into that building, the first floor, and they just camped there. I'm really sad to see that, to be honest with you. People, they're scared, they don't want to go over there at night. Another example is the nearby baseball. You see that between the Low store and also the track, the track right there, and then the building, and then after that it's a baseball stadium. And the building right there alongside the wall, they came alongside that wall. It's just so many of them. So I just feel sorry, in Salt Lake City, and thinking about maybe find a way, bring all those people back somewhere a little bit far away, and then we can have good condition and everything, what they need, healthcare and everything they need there. Why we have to do something like West Valley City, Salt Lake City, South Salt Lake City, very so close to the city. They can hop in the track and then, and UTA, and they can go downtown and then come back at night. Cause so much problem. Is that you hear anything from people they're studying that?
Yes, I will say the good news for me, after having been engaged in this pretty heavily for the last 7 or 8 years now, is I'm hearing rationality injected into the conversation now. And the reason I believe that is happening is because Wayne Niederhauser is sort of heading this up from a uninvolved or what's the right word? Unsolicited party perspective, meaning he doesn't stand to gain or lose from the conversation. He's just looking at this coming at it from a position of just coming into the situation and learning about it. And what I think that is doing, sir, is to the entire discussion, it's bringing a level of rationality about how we actually, while we certainly won't solve it, how do we make wise policy decisions that don't end up in those results. And Well, of course, the state has already made the decision to disperse. They've already made the dispersal model decision. That dispersal model decision can continue to perpetuate and therefore allow for provision of services in other locations. There are a whole bunch of things on the front end of this discussion that are also being discussed that I think are very helpful. Things like camping ordinances and enforcement of camping. Provision of services actually at the resource centers, like you mentioned, all the help that is needed that has not been yet injected into those resource centers to actually help people instead of just create this model, this loop. Those things I'm all hearing now, just in the last six months to year, the things that we frankly have kind of railed on from a let's do this logically perspective. So I have hope that that is true. I did watch during the legislative session many cities that truly just cannot see how it makes sense to have any kind of provision of service in their city, whether they think they're too far away or they think there's no location or they think this really is a Salt Lake City problem. Whatever was in their minds, I definitely saw a level of disbelief from the other cities that they would have to carry any of this burden. So I think from that perspective, there's a long way to go. I think from the idea that this is a problem for the entire state, for the Wasatch Front, for a larger community, we're not quite there yet from an understanding perspective. I think folks don't quite understand it yet, but I am starting to see a little few glimmers of light as we move forward. And certainly from our perspective, and I think as I've represented and as you guys have directed me, you as a council have directed me to represent, we really do a heavy lift here. And at some point you will break the back of the folks who are providing. And we're seeing that happen in South Salt Lake and in Midvale already. They as jurisdictions, we're seeing their backs being broken by the continual level of provision of service that they're required to give. And that's just the reality. And I think people are starting to see that. So I'm hopeful. Whether or not we end up somewhere great this year, this is the first time in 6 years or 7 years that I've had any reason to be hopeful, truthfully.
Yeah, I feel like we got a big hit here, like West Valley City, Salt Lake City, South Salt Lake, and the argument was in the past was because there's no healthcare system close by, no facility, other things nearby to help these people. But actually, is that we run into a problem. But other cities like Harriman, Sandy, Bluffdale, Riverton, they don't run into that problem because it's that they're thinking about its convenience. It's so close to the tracks, closer to healthcare. That's the argument all about. And we the guy would be very much a big hit.
Yeah.
And those.
Yeah.
I think it's not fair. Yeah. Why don't we build the healthcare, building down in Harriman or somewhere Riverton, and we can send them there. You know what I'm saying? They share the load with us. It's a portion of that.
Yeah.
We just here in Salt Lake City and South Salt Lake.
Yeah. Should be a great conversation at COM and a real conversation at COM. Yeah, at the very least, we'll get that out of the bill, that those things can be discussed for sure.
Yeah.
Any other questions? I barely needed a donut for that.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, are there any questions on the council calendar or any concerns?
So we are meeting for both meetings next week,
Correct,
but only study meeting the following week.
on the 22nd. And then we'll have both meetings
No
starting. in-
meetings on the 29th.
Correct. And then we'll have both of our meetings in April,
The
April.
first week of April, we'll have both meetings. Okay.
And then we need to talk these people into having their caucus on one night instead of two separate nights.
Bring it up at your caucus.
Will do. All right, nothing on the calendar. Any potential future agenda items? Nope. Council reports.
Mayor, I'm sorry. I've got like three.
Okay,
I'll try to make them quick. First one, if Eric, if you'll bring up that court construction slide, is the renewal of the conversation of a few weeks ago. So I got two new pieces of information on the court construction. One is that the state has once again extended their request for keeping it open. They can't get their HVAC construction done over their new facility. So now they've asked to be able to stay in their building until, or the building, City Hall, until April 15th. So that has changed a little bit. It's taken once again, or pushed the timeline a little bit down the road. Second one is, I told you I'd go back and get some information on how the payment schedule would work. The state did not show any inclination to change or extend out the payment schedule other than the contract. We do have flexibility within the contract. So as it stands right now, the contract says we would give half in the fiscal year in which the property close happens, in which we purchase the property, and then the second half in the year after that. So that would give us a little bit of flexibility from standpoint of stretching out that payment, and then we can handle that a couple of different ways. But I'm still left with the same basic question, which is, and this is where I need some guidance from the council. This project, from a construction standpoint, estimated is now twice as expensive as it was back when we first conceived it. So how would the council like us to proceed? We can either bond for the other 5 million, we can take that from fund balance, or we could just delay on as long as we possibly can. That building that they are in will come down. It needs to come down at some point, but we could continue on for a little while. So thoughts?
any thoughts at this moment? Might have to think on this one for a week.
The
Okay.
building they're in will come down. That means the court side of
Right.
City Hall.
No,
No,
that old
further
building
out.
across tracks, right?
Yeah, the building they're in now.
Okay. So across tracks to the north is the
Yes.
building.
Where
Yeah,
the courts are now.
yeah. I guess which courts? So
Yeah.
those courts are those courts.
Yeah.
Sorry, I thought you were talking those,
City
but
courts.
yeah, city courts. Okay, you want to give us a week and then we'll. If you need a
Yep, that'll be
decision.
fine. Okay, my second item is on Operation My Hometown. We've got a lot of success with that, and we are expanding it threefold and more, as you know, from the original neighborhood that we started in. When we started this project, Nicole was assigned to be the liaison with the various entities that make up the partnering services. And Craig Thomas was assigned to conductors, do the grunt work, so to speak. My question is this: we cannot continue on in the way that we are. We're going to have to add some personnel and some resources to that. I asked in this past year for Nicole and Craig to come up with a proposal. They did, which proposal included operational increases and staffing increases of 2 positions. And the funding for that would be around $460,000. I've cut that, at least for the initial upcoming year's proposal, which I'll be bringing to you as a recommendation, to about 150,000, actually just slightly under that. We'll fund that mostly through the RDA and through sanitation contributions of people or parts of that program that are pertinent and specific to that. But there's around 75-ish thousand that would need to come from a different source. I have 2 options for that. One is CDBG. In order to make that happen from Community Development Block Grant Program, we would pretty much have to cut off all the outside social services that we give money to right now. Now, there's obviously good logic to that, since we'd be basically just be redirecting the services that we are to targeted neighborhoods within the city. So that would be the one option for coming up with that other 75,000. The other option would be to bring it as an increase operationally to the general fund or absorb it within the general fund. Neither of those decisions need to be made right now, but I do need to hire this person to take over from this position. So I have most of the funding to do that, short of about $40,000-ish, 35 actually. I'm planning on doing that and going ahead and using basically just unused fund, not fund balance, but budget dollars for the remainder of this year. We have somebody that we want to bring on to help with that as we start running through the projects that'll be happening here in March, April, May, and June. So again, I don't need any decision right now from you on how we want to fund that increase, just for your benefit, Mayor, in case you didn't hear that.
I heard it.
That expenditure budget, as I am proposing it, was reduced to about $150,000, but I'll still need about 75,000 more from the sources that we haven't identified yet. One would be CDBG, one would be general fund. However, I need to hire this person now to get these projects going. So unless there is some objection from a majority of the council, I'm going to go do that. If you do have objection to that, that's fine too. Just let me know now, because we will have to scale back what we're doing with Operation My Hometown. I can't continue to have Nicole running that and the 20 other things I have her working on. And Craig can't do it on his own either. He's already putting in far more than his scheduled 40 hours a week to do that. So I just wanted to let you know. Obviously, the good news is Operation My Hometown is a great program. We've had huge success and we want to continue forward with it. But we do need to resource it. So are there any questions or concerns on that?
Yeah, I have a question for that, Wayne.
Yes.
Financially, right now, the city, we're supporting that operation is how much per year right now, Wayne?
It comes from a bunch of different sources, Tom, and we have hardly spent anything on it on our own. We've spent some one-time monies on events, projects. We've gotten funds from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And other than that, we've really pretty much absorbed it within Craig's salary and Nicole's salary and Park's budget, that sort of thing.
So we used to use the monies, CDBG, to do a remodel home, buy the home and then remodel. It's try to kind of like basically just become a nice home for the area. People, they can follow up with the thing we do in our city. But the cost for the housing right now is so expensive, so we don't do that. Is that we transfer that money over to the Operation Hometown, or we still keep that money?
Yeah, so that's partially correct, Tom. The CDBG budget, as you know, is around $1 million a year, and all of the city functions that we were already doing, we would still continue on. And that's one of them, the housing home rehab. We could still do some of those projects. The projects I'm talking about where we would take the 75,000 from are social services outside of the city. One or two of them are inside the city, where, for example, we're giving money to the Road Home or to the Community Action Program or the Utah Food Bank, that sort of thing. We'd be taking about $75,000 from those sorts of programs.
So you need one person, about $75,000 a year.
Yep, the projection or the request was for 2 people. I've cut that to 1. Minimum, we've got to have the 1 at least.
I don't know if we can find a replacement for those two. They're both so dynamic and everything.
Well, and just so I'm clear, Don, so Craig will still be working on that. He'll be in charge of it. So he'll still be there. He'll just have somebody to help him with all the work. Nicole will still remain and liaise with the church, for example, and other entities, all of the churches that are involved with this. I just won't have her running most of that work. Craig will be picking up a lot of that from her.
All right, so.
I don't know about an answer. I don't know if I have an answer on the hiring an additional resource, but I do want to understand the impact of the social services from CDBG funding. I've received some positive impact, feedback on how those are helping folks with rental assistance and things like that. So
Yeah,
I don't know if it's going to impact like the neighbor works or some of those other areas that are benefiting, but I think I would want to understand how that's the end result, how that'll impact those organizations.
yep. As we go through the CDBG process, you would be seeing which ones specifically would not be funded and which ones would. So you will see that through that process. And at that point, you could make that choice. Do we want to take that out of CDBG and redirect it internally, or do we want to fund it out of general fund dollars? Or the third option would be to cut back.
Here, Wayne, in the past, we used the CDBG money to buy house, remodel house. But now we don't do that. Can we use
No,
that
we-
money?
Yeah,
should do
Tom,
that.
Bill.
Are you talking the Idea House?
Yeah, idea house.
Yeah, we're not doing the Idea House this year.
We don't
Right,
do
so-
the house project, but we do home rehab still.
But we're
They're
not
just
doing that
they're
one. So
smaller scale.
So we cannot use that money to transfer over to the operation, my hometown?
No, that money's already being used, split up amongst these different programs. So you'd be redirecting that too. A lot of the times the Idea House money came from leftover one-time balances from CDBG.
I think that Operation My Hometown is something that we should commit to and invest in.
Right.
And I want to see it expanded, and we do need more employees. So I say go forward with that, and let's find a way to fund it.
do I have anybody else in favor of another?
Yeah, I'm not asking for in favor, Mayor. I'm saying if you've got objection to the plan I'm already on, tell me that. I'm not looking for a vote for saying yes, go ahead.
So what are you looking for then?
Just in case you do have objection and you don't want me to go forward, tell me to stop now.
Well, that's what I'm asking. If there's.
I thought you
We're in
were
favor,
asking.
so
Yeah, no, I will be hiring this fourth person or second person unless you guys tell me to not go.
that's what I'm asking.
My concern is our original conversation this earlier about the budget and how, you know, one of the options is we freeze hiring and freeze wages. And then, you know, an hour later, we're talking about hiring and, you know, expanding. And I understand that, but it's just a concern that I have that I really think we're gonna see some tightening. We're gonna have to tighten our belt and that's goes contrary to what we're talking about now, of expanding the employees.
But sometimes you have to spend money to make money, and when you cut back too much, the impact actually makes your revenue less. So, but sometimes you spend money, it improves the neighborhood, which makes our revenue increase, so.
I think Hometown is a great program. I love it. I want to see more of it. It's just,
The choice is a difficult one, but it's a pretty simple one. We started with nothing and we were in one neighborhood. Now we're in something like 5 neighborhoods. We can't do it with what we have.
Yeah, let's go for it.
Okay, thanks. Mayor, my third one is really kind of more of a good news item, which is the sustainability web pages are up on the website in case you haven't seen them or hadn't gotten that notice yet. So if you get a chance, just look down the web page and under the government side, there's an efficiency and sustainability pages. There's videos and stats and a really cool timeline on what's been accomplished over the last couple of 3 decades and other information. So check it out and I hope you all enjoy it. And that's it.
Okay. I did not have 4 say yes, go ahead and do whatever. So is there on the new person? I didn't have 4 say yes. So do you need
Is there
four to
anyone
say?
saying no? Is there anyone saying no?
I'll say no.
I just need more information. I don't understand what the position will be used for and also the impact of other programs and resources.
So you need more information? Okay,
I I personally think we don't do much with the city BG this year or last year. We did use some money transfer over to operation my hometown,
okay,
save some money.
okay, there's your,
I'm sorry, I didn't understand that. What was that source?
Tom said that he was good with using CBG money to pay for my hometown.
Oh, okay.
There you go. All right, that's 4 for that. All right, anything else from Mr. Pyle?
No, ma'am. Thank you.
Council reports.
You made mine, you brought the donuts.
Well, I brought the donuts. Yep, Krispy Kreme's open today and it was a good ribbon cutting and it was indoors, so it was a little warmer. And they still have a pretty good line and I guess it's anticipated to be a lot longer tonight, so you may have missed your only good time between 2 and 3 to go get it. All right, any other council reports?
Mayor and I were at a neighborhood
Oh, yeah,
watch party or watch meeting last week. It was kind of a party. There was quite a few people there. It was really well done. I'm gonna make efforts to see if I can help our neighborhood replicate it because they were well organized and just a great community. So that was really a lot of fun to be a part of. And then the only other thing is I emailed Steve about 3D printing. We're at work, we're looking at 3D printing a house. We're actually looking at doing a bunch of them down in southern Utah. We're having problems with municipalities being comfortable with the method of construction. So if you don't know 3D printing, I use a big 3D printer that basically pours concrete in a pattern to build this house. And so just in discussion with Steve and Wayne about options of how we can kind of demonstrate that and if we can find a municipality like West Valley that's will let us experiment a little. So might be more to talk about later. So thanks for your reply, Steve. That was great.
okay,
That's it for tonight.
all right,
Gonna get a caucus meeting.
all right,
Just on Chamber West, I attended one meeting and also an orientation. I'm just curious on the banquet that's happening at the end of this month. Does the city purchase a table or?
yes.
Okay.
And you should all get an invite to that. I mean, you've gotten the invites in your box, but the city will have a table. So if you'll just let Angel know if you're able to attend or not, they'll make sure we have enough space. Anything else? Seeing, we don't need a closed session. So one more motion to adjourn.
Motion adjourned.
All in favor, say aye.
Hi.
Okay, we are adjourned. I can't get a blue.